we're going to do something here, and we're going to talk a little bit about why it's so hard to let go of toxic friends, family members, relationship. And this one's particularly difficult for me because I just recently went through an event that was quite hard to deal with, and it made me stop and think. And I realized that there was a bunch of different things I could do. I could have got angry. I could have shouted, could have screamed, could have said, "How dare you?" I could have done a number of different things, and many of those would not have been helpful. And as I sat there thinking about, is this really the way things end? I thought, oh, maybe that's not so bad. Because I get it, right? Sometimes when this happens, it feels like the loss of a loved one, because it is. It feels almost like you're grieving, because you are. And so we might go through many of the stages of grief. We might try to bargain, we might try to rationalize and say, well, it wasn't really that bad, it wasn't, maybe it wasn't all terrible after all. Maybe it was me. Well, maybe if I said this, maybe there's some certain combinations of words that I could have said to make things better. And we tend to try to save something that's not really savable. And in this, I noticed that we tend to have this rose-tinted glasses a lot of times where we look at all these great moments. And so we kind of romanticize how good the relationship was without looking at all the things that sort of led up to it and why it was so bad. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we're a human being. We're not perfect. Hold the thought. So sorry about that, guys. So I just had a call that I had to attend to. But I think one of the other big things, of course, is that you'll see this kind of cookie crumbs of affection during this cycle of abuse. And so when you get that, you're like, oh, that was great. You get a little taste, right? But that little taste is not enough. So when you get that little taste, you go, oh, I want more of that. Because it's so rare, you're just like, I got to have more. I got to have more. And as you keep going on, it's just sort of one of this thing with this issue where you're just like going and going and going. And because that little taste reminds you that there's some hope, that there's some, there's some real potential here. And when there's some real potential, you think, well, maybe, just maybe, this sorry relationship can be saved. Maybe, just maybe, it's not all bad, and I can indeed fix this. And there, we blah 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 blah, and you play these what if games. So one of the biggest things that I find people do as well is just blaming themselves, and that's a really bad one. But people do blame themselves sometimes. When they go, maybe I could have done this, maybe I could have done that. Or on the other side, people blame their friends. And they'll be like, this was their fault, they did this to me, they did that. But here's the truth. Joy and happiness don't come from blame. There's a reason these people get so fucking angry, because they're not handling their emotions properly. They're putting that baggage off on other people without looking inwards and being like, look, how can I love myself? How can I move forward from this? How can I learn? And this victim mentality just makes you feel weak and powerless and hopeless. So, what can we do about it? Well, of course, the biggest, most obvious thing that people have a problem with is they're afraid of what happens if I break this off? What happens if I ruin this friendship? Not ruin, but what happens if I let go of this friendship? And so it's like, the grass isn't always green on the other side, and we worry, because as people, we kind of know what this is. And sure, it's kind of shitty, it's not the best thing ever, but what we do know is it's familiar, and we know that at least at the moment, it can be tolerated because we haven't done anything. It hasn't got to the point where we have to act immediately. Even if it's overwhelming, it's not at the point quite yet where we just have to do something because we can't take it for another second anymore. So I like to ask, is, of course, take some time to write it down or hop in the shower. People find some of the best ideas in the shower. And that's because you're in a relaxed state, you're calm, there's nothing else going on around you, you're not playing on your phone, there's not all these multiple sources of overstimulation to keep you essentially zombified. You have nothing but time when you're in the shower to think. And it's in an environment that's typically relaxing and soothing, therapeutic, that doesn't require much thought, like as if you were like studying or playing a game or something that require your full attention. So, one solution I like to offer is try a trial run. Just take a step back, even if it's for a few hours or maybe a day or a week, couple weeks, couple months, whatever it is. Slowly step back and then keep a journal, keep a log or something, and write down during this time, how was it that you felt during this sort of situation? And you'll notice that either one, indeed, there was some issues, or maybe not. And you can kind of get a general idea of, am I ready to move forward with this, or am I not? Because, of course, it's not just as simple as do it or don't. And thinking these ultimatums doesn't take into account that everybody's story is personally customized to them with a lot of variables in between. So, I've mentioned this before, but time is our most valuable currency. And so I won't get too much into this, but here's the deal. We only have a limited amount of relationships we can maintain, and even more limited when it comes to close relationships. Because of our job, because of our work schedule, because of our lifespan, because of other hobbies and activities we have to do, because of raising children, and anything else, whether it be groceries or other errands, we can only spend so much time with so many people, and that's also assuming we have the energy for it. So you have to understand, you don't have a limited amount of time that you can spend on person to person. Even if you theoretically had the energy for it, you don't have the time. And more so, it's also about if they're putting in the effort too. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, this one's something that you don't think about, but even if they're not outwardly, and we use the word toxic all the time, and it's a valid word, I think, but what about it? Are they progressing? So sometimes what you'll see is with friends who are particularly bad is they're not progressing, they're kind of shooting downwards, and they're maintaining just contentness. And people say, well, good enough is good enough. And of course, the problem with good enough is good enough is it can only stay just as good as it is, or it can get worse. And over time, it tends to get worse. You leave your bedroom just the way it is, you don't do any maintenance or cleaning or work on it, and it just gets messier. The law of entropy just determines that things get messier. And while it's fine now, let's say, for example, they're in an environment where they're still living with their parents and they're working a minimum wage job, and that's fine right now. What about 5 years, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? You really think that shit's going to work? I had an older brother, Robert, who's just really a piece of shit, to put it frankly. And there's, I don't hate the dude, but he is a piece of shit. He's a great example. And he mooched off of our grandparents all the time, was terrible to our parents, was terrible to us, and the whole time he never progressed. And what happened was, even if he meant well, he was a big burden on everybody else because we had to carry him. We had to make sure that he got food because he couldn't hold down a job. We had to make sure that he took a shower because he didn't want to wash himself. We had to make sure that he knew how to do social skills because he didn't know how to talk to people. And he was a real sorry son of a bitch, right? He was a real bum. But I wasn't mad at him for it. I'm still not mad at him to this day for it. But I choose not to keep him in my life, right? And he's a prime example of it. Because I know he's just going to be extra weight. He can't carry his own. And if I'm already trying to lift all my own weight, I'm struggling with it, you add on another 100, 200 pounds to, let's say my reps, I'm on the bench. I need a spotter, not just somebody who's going to push down on the other side of the weight and make it harder for me. And that's the next thing, right? Is when you're in some type of mutually agreed relationship with a family member, with a friend, whatever, when whether it be like a professional relationship, a romantic relationship, a spiritual relationship, whatever it is, you don't owe them anything. Now, what do I mean by that? Because I don't mean literally anything. Of course, you want to be respectful. You want to be dignified. You want to make sure you're carrying your own weight. You want to make sure you're a good friend and you're there for them. But you do not have to just do things because they tell you to do things. There should be some legitimate reasoning behind it. People don't just get to tell you because I said so. And I see this so much with, adults who grow up from being children, and they have parents who tell them, because I said so, do what I said, are you talking back to me? And they never explain. And what happens is there's this resentment that's created, and you go, you son of a bitch. And when this resentment is created, it sort of fractures the relationship, and then you end up walking on eggshells. And it's almost like this weird OCD-like thing, like, should I call them? Should I not? Should I say anything right now? Are they going to explode? Oh, God, they came home from work and they had a bad day. Who should I be in the room? And it becomes so obsessing that you get so stuck in the moment that you can't see into the future. And that's just really sad because it happens to so many fucking people. So, of course, the next thing is going to be is there's this good lifeguard example, right, to this whole dead weight thing. And so it's like this, right? So you want to be compassionate, you want to save them, you want to love them because you want the best for them. Well, in the lifeguard situation, you're trained that if somebody's drowning, you try to save them. But if they kick and scream and they start pulling you down, you tell them, hey, you got to stop that. And if they don't listen, you let go of them. You might think, well, that's awfully cruel. That's, you're letting them drown. Well, the alternative is that they pull you down with them. And some people on this inevitable downward spiral, and you can either choose to step away or you can choose to go down with them because you tried to play hero. And so it can even be more subtle ways, whether, like, for example, let's say you're sharing good news, right? Well, let's say you hit the lottery or something, okay? And they get jealous and they say, that should have been me, or they feel like they're entitled to a cut of that. Instead of being happy for you, they'll be jealous and they'll try to one-up it, or they'll try to say, whether fictitious or real, they'll say some story about, yeah, actually, I did that too. I was able to hit the lottery, and I got with all these, I got with 12 bitches or something. Because let's say you meet somebody nice, and so then they start talking about, they get with 12 bitches or something. It's always a one-upping of you because they can't ever just let you have your moment. And when you're sad, what often they'll do is they'll kind of revel in it, right? And they'll say, well, maybe you deserved it, or maybe that was your fault, or well, of course, things like that are going to keep happening for you. And of course, there's a difference between genuine, there's a genuine criticism and then just kind of putting you down. And one of the biggest ways you can tell for that is by looking at the history of who they are as a person, right? Look at how has their other friendships gone. If you listen, you'll see the signs with these people very clearly. And one of the biggest signs is, do they talk about other people the same way? How many people have warned you about them, et cetera, et cetera. So you get to know some of their closest friends. And then you also look at the friend group that they surround themselves with, right? So if people are surrounding themselves with nothing but toxic people, as we know from psychology, you are a product of your environment. So if they have a bunch of, let's say, druggies around them, or, a bunch of bums or whatever, the likelihood that they could have some of those characteristics are pretty high. It's why sometimes we see with people when they grow up in abusive households, often killers, for example, who grew up in abusive households will then be abusive. Now, that brings me to my next point, and this is a beautiful thing that I want to read, relating to a YouTube comic posted by Marty Walsh. There was a story of a violent drunkard who had twin sons he abused. One grew up to be a successful married man. The other was a violent drunkard like his father. Someone asked the successful son why he turned out like he did. He said, I grew up watching my father. They asked the drunkard son why he turned out the way he did, and he said, I grew up watching my father. So what's the moral of that story? The moral of the story is, at the end of the day, it is up to you to make your own choices. You are the main character of your own story, and you are the one who is ultimately in control. And if somebody can't be a positive learning experience for them, then allow them to at least be a reminder, a warning for you on how not to conduct yourself. So boundaries are another big thing with toxic relationships of any sort, where pay attention to how they respond to boundaries. They might try to play some colorful language with you or something, or say, actually, you're wrong, or no, that doesn't seem reasonable. And that's at the point where you have to just be like, look, this is an attack on you. This is what's okay for me, and this is what's not. And when you're talking about it, they might take it as a personal attack. But again, you have to understand that's not on you. That's not your responsibility. And sometimes when they particularly are shitty to you, they might make up some pretty good excuses, and you might believe it. Because as people, we want to see the best in others. We want to believe that the friends we've chosen are indeed good people. We might have this image, where when we first get to know somebody, it's pretty great, right? And especially with toxic relationships, there's a lot of markers, but one of them that you see is this sort of intensity of, it's almost like overwhelming, right? But in a positive way, where you just want to hang out all the time and things are really good. And this can last several months to years. And everything just seems fucking great. And so you still have this idea in the back of your head of how great it used to be. And yet here we are, and it's like, okay, well, maybe this is just a temporary thing. And so you have this kind of conflict where you're trying to fight off, oh, well, maybe this is temporary, or maybe this is permanent. So, again, another thing would be like unsolicited criticizing or advice. And so what I mean by that, it's like this universal understanding, right? That it is our duty to speak out against injustices. So if somebody is being a genuinely shitty parent, we have to say something, because it is our responsibility as a human being. But it's also understood, for example, that you would not just go up with little to no information and tell a parent, hey, you shouldn't be raising your child like that. Because there's many different factors, right? Let's say you just saw something, and it's not abusive or anything, it's just how they work with the child, right? For example, I knew parents who, unfortunately, they're still big. I blocked a friend recently. His name was Jacob, and I blocked him recently a couple weeks ago. Nothing bad, by the way. There was no drama with it, but I had to block him because I remember I was trying to talk to him about, hey, actually, I don't think spanking kids are okay. And I remember he tried to give me unsolicited advice. And not only was it unsolicited and I didn't ask for it, but he wasn't willing to sort of see my point. So a lot of people are particularly toxic. If they think they know everything, then they can't learn anything. And if they can't learn anything, then that means they're stuck in their ways. And if they're stuck in their ways, then that means the only way they can go is downwards. And so I remember sitting there and asking, like, hey, here's all this research. And oftentimes what you'll see with people is they'll try to rationalize, they'll dismiss you, and they'll completely write off everything you're saying instead of recognizing that maybe you have something to say. And so the way I've always looked at it is, when I'm talking with people, I always like to assume that everybody has a story to share, right? Everybody has something they can teach me. So even if I don't particularly like what somebody's saying, I want to hear them out. Because even if I don't agree with anything they're saying, there might be something in there that they teach me. And if they don't teach me or change my mind, they might teach me about the other side and why they think the way they think. And that way I can better formulate my argument towards their personal beliefs and kind of get down to there. Because the truth is, a lot of our core values and beliefs come strongly from emotion or faith. And that's not always in line with reasoning and logic. And that can sometimes be good and bad. And so it's important to recognize, where is this criticism coming from? And first of all, and is it coming from a place of love? And are they also willing to hear what you have to say? Because often what this criticism does is it comes out of nowhere, it's consistent, it's unreasonable, it's asking for all these different things that there's just no way in hell that you could possibly fulfill. And even if you did, it tends to, there's this progressive ladder, this pattern where it becomes more and more severe, right? And you have to ascribe to them. There's this like very simplistic thinking of there are people like me, and then there's evil, and you have to really look out for that. And people will show those types of signs. You just have to pay attention. So of course the next thing back to that is, one of the biggest things is there's this great TED Talk I saw about Joe and the bullet story. So Joe is walking around, and one day he's leaving the store, and some glass falls down. At least that's what he thinks. He's some glass, and his head starts bleeding. It hurts. He goes home, and it's hurting. And on his way home, he goes to shower. Now it's still hurting a little bit, but for the most part, the pain has sort of dissipated. So Joe thinks nothing of it. He doesn't schedule a doctor's appointment, and for many years, he goes throughout his life where he never even thinks about the bullet or anything like that, about his head. So 20 years, 30 years down the road, he goes to a doctor's appointment because he's having these splitting migraines all of a sudden. And the doctor calls him and he's like, how long has your head been hurting? When did you notice the bullet was in your head? And he had no idea. He's like, what bullet? The doctor was like, what caused this? And Joe couldn't think of anything because it had been so long. He didn't even pay it any mind. It was just something that kind of went behind him. And he's like, oh, shit. Okay, yeah, this is what is it. And so the doctor treated him. And after the doctor treated him, Joe made a full recovery. And that's sometimes what happens with us, right? We go through abuse and we think that time will just heal everything. We're conditioned to believe that the time heals all wounds. But the truth is that unless you do the work, unless you put in the effort, you're going to be carrying this baggage along with you in some very, very unique ways to other relationships, because it never really dies. It just tends to evolve in new ways. And then it just takes that one triggering event with somebody else where all these bad memories come back up, and now you're like, oh, so they've just been lying dormant. They kind of pressurize and like a boil until it's ready to pop. And so, what can we do at the end of all of this? Well, I think if there's any takeaway, that you have to understand there's two things. To gain your new life, you're going to have to lose your old one. There's always going to be some type of sacrifice. There's always going to be some type of hurt. You're always going to feel like something happened along the way, and unfortunately, that is the truth. And you can be bitter about that your whole life. And by the way, I'm sorry for the Discord notifications. My friends have just been hitting me up like crazy. We're going to play League of Legends after this. So, we spend all this time focusing on the other people, but you know what's equally important to do? Instead of blaming those people, we can't change that. We cannot worry about the things we can't change because we can't change them. No matter what we do, we're not going to be able to change other people. For example, some people's beliefs are as strong as... It's almost as strong as the knowledge that we are carbon-based life form. Almost as strong as the knowledge that the earth is round. And so for some people, their beliefs are just that strong. So you have to ask yourself, always make an attempt, right? But after so long, you have to ask, is it even worth an effort? Is it even worth the effort? Are they even going to listen? So before you put in all this effort and you bend over backwards, you have to ask, are they even trying? And is this really worth the effort? Is the juice worth the squeeze? You don't want to get to a point where you've run down, because there's all these other people out there who are loving you, who care about you, who do want to be your friend. There's all these other people if you just look. So when you're spending all this time on these people, what does that say about you and your self-worth? Question for you to sort of think on before we end this. What would you tell a best friend that you loved very much? What would you say to them to help them out in these times? You think about that.